Hello everybody, welcome back to the YouTube channel and welcome to part 3 of a 4-part series from a recent podcast that I was able to produce with Justin from The Honest Drink. Now in part 3, we're going to be talking about Western media and how it shapes our perception of China. This is a topic that I have talked about extensively on my YouTube channel, and I want everybody to realize exactly how Western media is shaping our minds and shaping how we look at the country of China. This is a very important episode, and it's really important that all of us understand that every media in the world certainly has a bias, and that's why it's very important for you to go out in the world, experience things for yourself, and make sure that you seek a lot of information from a variety of sources. This is a really great episode. Without further ado, let's jump in the podcast.
One of your videos that I really like is, I think it's titled "How Western Media Shapes Our Perspective on China."
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
we're kind of going back to kind of the main topic. We want to talk about at first is kind of the imbalance in the narrative, and I want you to kind of share a little bit of your thoughts on that because you break it down really, really well. And the reason is because I feel a lot of the misunderstandings, number one, like what you said, are things that don't translate well culturally. So there's a lot of misunderstandings and things that are being lost in translation in terms of cultural differences. And so for people who don't know those cultural differences, they're like, oh, well, that's just really bad because that's not how I think about things. Those are not my values, right?
Right.
So I kind of want to get your take on the whole Western media thing. And I think there are really relevant ties with what's happening currently in the United States as well with that as well. So can you share a little bit about that video? And I mean, I just felt
Yeah.
it was really insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that video was interesting because it was really my response to this Asian hate crime that we've seen in America that has been growing very steadily. It's extremely alarming. This is it's been amazing because my wife is Chinese, and she both of her grandmothers are still alive. They're still living and in good health. And I think when she was seeing these images of these poor Chinese grandmothers walking down the street in San Francisco or Oakland and being attacked and pushed and assaulted, it really hit her in her heart, just like, my gosh, like I have a grandmother that age. That is just so scary. This is somebody's grandmother that is just getting attacked for the color of their skin. And we saw the unfortunately the incident in Atlanta as well. And I said the whole thing is all related because, again, I have to take myself out of being an expat for 10 years and having a really unique insight into China. I'm going to put myself back to being just a Florida boy that had never traveled to China. And then, just being in that little bubble, that Florida bubble. And, and again, like I have a lot of friends that are from, in my hometown that have never left. And, I can imagine their views of China are very different than mine. And again, it is just comes down to that experience. But again, when you look at Western media and how they're portraying China, and there's a couple of examples in that video that I'll bring up again because I think they're really relevant. When you look at, for example, with coronavirus, COVID-19, when that started happening, it was basically a year ago. New York Times published 2 articles. The first one was published at 10:30 a.m. and it talked about China is locking down the economy. It's locking down its citizens. It is not allowing them to travel. It's costing the livelihood of these Chinese people. And they pictured the image they chose was this shopkeeper in China, very dimly lit. The shopkeeper has their head down. I mean, you look at this and it's a very sad and gloomy perspective. I mean, you just glance through the headline, you're like, wow, these Chinese people are suffering. And then literally 20 minutes later on the exact same day, New York Times publishes Italy is now shutting down. They're going to sacrifice the economy because they're going to do their best job to handle this virus. And then you kind of see, and their image that they chose was the Italian prime minister kind of standing at a press conference, kind of looking like, almost like a hero. And I said, the interesting thing is people aren't going to be able to pick that up. But this is what's happening is subconsciously, you're just reading this article. Oh man, geez, look at China. Oh, it's terrible. These people don't have freedom over there. Oh, look at Italy. Oh, good for them. They're doing what they need to do. So there's a little bit of bias that's just been planted into your mind there without you even really knowing that. And then you look at all of these articles that get published and they have these very, negative spins against China, and a lot of it's just simple words. I mean, even the simple thing of the Chinese regime. I hate that word regime, because when you say the word regime again, and I mentioned this in the video, is when you say the word regime, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means a form of government. Okay, that's the literally dictionary definition. But when you actually, as we know in the English language and context, when you say regime, you're really implying almost that government's not legit. That's not a legitimate government, or we need to eventually overtake that government, or we should overthrow that government. We need to put in a more democratic and peaceful government. If China was a democracy, we wouldn't be calling it a regime. But because by labeling it that, again, negative connotation, you're immediately thinking, China in a negative light as a result.
Absolutely.
Right? 100%. And so, and then it was just, the problem is on social media. I remember seeing earlier in the year, there was a video from Africa, and there was a bunch of African kids, and they were singing some song in Chinese. And I think somebody's like, look at these poor children in Africa being forced to learn the Chinese language. This is colonialism 2.0 by China, going to Africa and enslaving these children. And I think the video was crazy. It had like over 1 million views. I mean, it was so popular on Twitter. And I said, this is the problem with social media right now. First of all, this is like a 15-second clip. We have no context behind this, and I'm like, first of all, I mean, these kids are learning the most popular language in the world. If you're from Africa and you're learning to speak Chinese, like, good on you. Like, that's gonna do you well in your life. Learning Chinese is a great asset to have. But I mean, it's just amazing that people can be like, I can't believe this is what China's doing. And I'm like, what, making them learn Chinese? And we don't even know if they're making them. I mean, again, this is a random 15-second clip that we have no context behind, and I mean, I saw another one. There's a very negative guy on Twitter that's very anti-China. I remember, he had this video, again, about 10 seconds long. They're never too long because, it wouldn't serve their purpose. And it's literally these guys who with shovels, picking up all these broken cell phones. And he's just like, there's, millions of phones have been lost in Wuhan. I can only imagine the death toll, millions and millions of, right? And it's like, whoa. First of all, the video is such poor quality. You can't even really tell if it's in China or not. And again, you don't even know if this is in Wuhan. You don't even know where this is from. But all of a sudden, we're meant to believe like, oh my gosh, like all these people, and it doesn't even make sense. So you're assuming that 1 million people died of COVID, but yet all of it. But do you drop your phone off in the parking lot before you die? Like, magically everyone's phone's in one spot? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me at all. I mean, if you just think about it, logically. And the last example that I'll give here is, it was a very recent one that I read on New York Times. It said China just released its 5th vaccine, and it's made from hamster ovary cells. And I called my dad up and I told him this, and I just said, and I'm like, hey, I read this new article. This is what it's called. And he's like, what? And I said, yeah, that was my reaction too. Like, why would China be using hamster ovary cells? But then I actually did some research, and I found out that hamster ovary cells is actually the universal practice in the world. This technique of using hamster ovary cells is how you make proteins for these vaccines. It was actually developed in a Boston laboratory in 1957, believe it or not. And again, this is universally used. So this is a biologist that shared this information. And she's like, that headline is racist, because you're basically wanting people to assume that China's doing weird stuff with animals. That's the goal, right?
This
I mean, you
was
could easily.
I'm sorry.
Right?
This was an American scientist, right? Dr. Sandra Steingruber or something like that.
That's right. Yeah. Dr. Sandra Steingruber.
Yeah, I saw your video because she tweeted out. She's like, "Hold on, guys. This is what we do. This is what all the labs do, right? When they're creating vaccines, hamster ovary cells are universal and completely common practice for anyone in this field."
And see, this is the subtle bias that you have in Western media, because what the New York Times wrote is completely true. It is an accurate statement. China did release its 5th vaccine, and it is made from hamster ovary cells. But guess what? America's vaccines are made from that too. If that's, I'm not a biologist, but if this is what this biologist says is the universal practice, then it is as well. But again, this is how you have to really see how Western media is playing this game,
Yeah.
because they very subtly putting in these little hints, and they're just making you, basically making you hate China. And that's really the goal, is to make you dislike China more. And that's kind of something that I'm really trying to focus on with my talk show, Real Talk China, is that I'm bringing in guests, from that have on the ground experience in China. And I'm really excited for my next guest. We're filming in a couple of days. Basically, he's an entrepreneur that is working for I believe it's a Finnish company. Maybe, no, I think he's Finnish. It's a Swedish company. And they're basically partnering with the Chinese government to help disabled people in China. And China's government is investing a lot of money building these rehab centers. He's actively, in this business. This is his passion, is helping disabled people. And he has a tremendous support from the government of China. And, and I'm like, this is an amazing story. Like, what you're doing, your work is phenomenal. And like, of course, would New York Times or any Western publication, would they want to feature that article? Of course not, because it's positive about China. Like, wait, China's government's helping disabled people. They're investing money into the society. They're partnering with this, with this Swedish company to do all of these great things that are actually going to help people's lives. Well, that's not a good story. I mean, that's how are we going to spin that in a negative way, right? So I'm like, well, that's where I'm going to step up. I'm going to get this guy on my YouTube channel and to give him a voice and say, look, tell us your story. Tell us what the work that you're doing. And that's kind of my angle that I want to do, is try to just bring a little bit of perspective. Kind of going back to that first point I said, there is a lot of positivity in the country of China. There's a lot of optimism. When you go on the streets of China, you talk to people. How do you feel about China? What do you think 5 years from now? Well, I think it's gonna be great. Because I go on past presidents. I mean, look at the last 30 years in China. Every year is getting better and better. Why wouldn't I think the future is going to get better for the country of China? And so I think that's, again, that's a really important thing. I'm glad you brought up that question. I just want people to really understand there is a tremendous bias against China. And I want people to really go out there and seek the other side of the story. And I think that's what all of us on YouTube, again, all of us have extensive experience inside the country of China. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, everybody, as always, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend it with me here on YouTube. I look forward to bringing you the fourth and final segment from this podcast interview. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and I look forward to seeing you in a future video.